From this conception of the lower mental life, the laws of the association of ideas can be deduced. But before we deal with this point, we must first show the insufficiency of the current theories of association. That every idea which arises in the mind has a relation of similarity or of contiguity with the previous mental state, we do not dispute, but a statement of the kind throws no light on the mechanism of association, nor indeed does it really tell us anything at all. For we should seek in vain for two ideas which have not some point of resemblance, or which do not touch each other somewhere. To take similarity first. However profound are the differences which separate two images, we shall always find, if we go back high enough, a common genus to which they belong, and consequently a resemblance which may serve as a connecting link between them. And in regard to contiguity, a perception A, as we said before, will not evoke, by contiguity, a former image B, unless it recalls to us first an image A', which is like it, because it is the recollection A', and not the perception A, which really touches B in memory. However distant then we suppose the terms A and B from each other, a relation of contiguity can always be found between them, provided that the intercalated term A' bears a sufficiently far-fetched resemblance to A. This is as much as to say that between any two ideas chosen at random there is always a resemblance, and always even contiguity. So that when we discover a relation of contiguity or of resemblance between two successive ideas, we have in no way explained why the one evokes the other. What we really need to discover is how a choice is effected among an infinite number of recollections, which all resemble in some way the present perception, and why only one of them, this rather than that, emerges into the light of consciousness. But this is just what associationism cannot tell us, because it has made ideas and images into independent entities floating, like the atoms of Epicurus, in an inward space, drawing near to each other and catching hold of each other when chance brings them within the sphere of mutual attraction. And if we try to get to the bottom of the doctrine on this point, we find that its error is that it intellectualizes ideas overmuch. It attributes to them a purely speculative role, believes that they exist for themselves and not for us, and overlooks the relation which they bear to the activity of the will. If memories move about, indifferent, in a consciousness that is both lifeless and shapeless, there is no reason why the present perception should prefer and attract any one of them. We can only, in that case, note the conjunction when once it has taken place and speak of similarity or of contiguity, which is merely, at bottom, to express in vague terms that our mental states have affinities for one another. But even of this affinity, which takes the double form of contiguity and of similarity, associationism can furnish no explanation. The general tendency to associate remains as obscure for us, if we adhere to this doctrine, as the particular forms of association. Having stiffened individual memory images into ready-made things, given cut and dry in the course of our mental life, associationism is reduced to bringing in, between these objects, mysterious attractions of which it is not even possible to say beforehand, as of physical attraction, by what effects they will manifest themselves. For why should an image which is, by hypothesis, self-sufficient, seek to accrue to itself others either similar or given in contiguity with it? The truth is that this independent image is a late and artificial product of the mind. In fact, we perceive the resemblance before we perceive the individuals which resemble each other, and in an aggregate of contiguous parts we perceive the whole before the parts. We go on from similarity to similar objects, embroidering upon the similarity as on their common stuff or canvas, the variety of individual differences. And we go on also from the whole to the parts by a process of decomposition, the law of which will appear later, a process which consists in breaking up, for the greater convenience of practical life, the continuity of the real. Association, then, is not the primary fact. Dissociation is what we began with, and the tendency of every memory to gather to itself others must be explained by the natural return of the mind to the undivided unity of perception. But here we discover the radical vice of associationism. Given a present perception which forms by turns, with different recollections, several associations one after another, there are two ways, as we said, of conceiving the mechanism of this association. We may suppose that the perception remains identical with itself, a true psychical atom which gathers to itself others just as these happen to be passing by. This is the point of view of associationism, but there is also another, precisely the one which we have indicated in our theory of recognition. We have supposed that our entire personality, with the totality of our recollections, is present, undivided within our actual perception. Then if this perception evokes in turn different memories, it is not by a mechanical adjunction of more or more numerous elements, which, while it remains itself unmoved, it attracts around it, but rather by an expansion of the entire consciousness, which, spreading out over a larger area, discovers the fuller detail of its wealth. So a nebulous mass, seen through more and more powerful telescopes, resolves itself into an ever greater number of stars. On the first hypothesis, in favor of which there is little but its apparent simplicity and its analogy with a misunderstood physical atomism, each recollection is a fixed and independent being, of which we can neither say why it seeks to accrue it to itself others, nor how it chooses, among 1,000 memories which should have equal rights, those with which to associate itself in virtue of similarity or contiguity. we must suppose that ideas jostle each other at random, or that they exert among themselves mysterious forces, and moreover, we have against us the witness of consciousness, which never shows us psychical facts floating as independent entities. From the second point of view, we merely state a fact, namely that psychic facts are bound up with each other, and are always given together to immediate consciousness as an undivided whole which reflection alone cuts up into distinct fragments. What we have to explain, then, is no longer the cohesion of internal states, but the double movement of contraction and expansion, by which consciousness narrows or enlarges the development of its content. But this movement, we shall see, is the result of the fundamental needs of life. And we shall see also why the associations, which we appear to form in the course of this movement, correspond to all the possible degrees of so-called contiguity and resemblance. Let us, for a moment, suppose our psychical life reduced to sensory motor functions alone. In other words, suppose ourselves placed in the diagrammatic figure on page 211 at the point S, which corresponds to the greatest possible simplification of our mental life. In this state, every perception spontaneously prolongs itself into appropriate reactions, for analogous former perceptions have set up more or less complex motor apparatus, which only await a recurrence of the same appeal in order to enter into play. Now there is, in this mechanism, an association of similarity, since the present perception acts in virtue of its likeness to past perceptions, and there is also an association of contiguity, since the movement which followed those former perceptions reproduce themselves, and may even bring in their train a vast number of actions coordinate with the first. Here, then, we seize association of similarity and association of contiguity at their very source, and at a point when they are almost confounded in one, not indeed thought, but act and lived. They are not contingent forms of our psychical life. They represent the two complementary aspects of one and the same fundamental tendency, the tendency of every organism to extract from a given situation that in it which is useful, and to store up the eventual reaction in the form of a motor habit, that it may serve other situations of the same kind.